PJNet.TV, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. on the East Coast. It is time for Phase 1. We have Ben Cooper standing by in the green room. We are recording. We are streaming. We have a chat room waiting. Let's switch to Studio 8 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, good evening and welcome to PJNet.TV. I am so glad to be here. Literally. I've had a rough day. Before we get started, thank you all who have offered a prayer, well wishes, and things like that. I got a toothache, got an infection in the back tooth back here. It's coming out next Thursday. All right. So if you are watching this on YouTube or Facebook, I appreciate it. We appreciate it. We also invite you to come join the fellowship if you'd like. Go to pjnet.tv, the same video you're watching now. There, you can watch at pjnet.tv and join in the chat. Now, on the first Tuesday of every month, we are blessed to have Ben Cooper be our professor, our lecturer, our TEDx talker, whatever you want to call it. And he is quite the friend of PJNet.TV. Let me bring him on the stage here at the Eagle's Nest. And he always has something fascinating behind him. And behind him, the wall is adorned with, well, signs of all sort and gear of all sort. What's going on, Ben?
Well, I want to take a break from last month. We talked about bees, but wanted to share some things about the horse industry. And in my promo, I put out a photo. We happen to live in a county that also includes Amish sects. So there's several
Sect.
groups.
SECTS.
Correct. But there's Amish communities in the area, and it's pretty common for us. We call a bad traffic day is when you get stuck behind a horse and buggy. That slows things down. But I got some horse tack. Some of this is from the farm I grew up on, especially I have to give a shout out. My grandfather loved horses, worked with horses every chance he could. Even when he had tractors that could do the work better, he still liked going back to the old horse and plow and cultivator. And that mirror that's up on the wall hung in my office for 32 years. I made that. It's a horse collar that my grandfather used, and the hames that are around it, and put a mirror in there and had that in my office when I guess you might say back when I worked for a living. Since I'm retired, but some of the other stuff I actually found on the property that I'm going to show tonight, talking about the horses that kind of helped develop this country over the last several hundred years. And the question that I asked in that promo was, what drives you? Or better yet, who drives you? Who's controlling the reins? And so that's kind of where I think I'm going to take everybody on a short trip. It's not around the Cross W. It's in southern Somerset, Pennsylvania, Somerset County, Pennsylvania.
Well, the fact is, Ben, we're all being driven, whether we realize it or not. So I think step one would be realize that something is driving us. You need to know what that is. And then, of course, once you know what it is, then you can discern, is that, we have some choice as to who we let drive.
Right. We get the choice. We get to choose. We have a choice to make. And if we're the horse, sometimes we need to be driven in the right direction. And so I'm going to start off. One of my favorite parts of elementary school was show and tell. Always liked it. because you never knew what was going to come out of the box. I'm going to grab something. And if our PJ Net horse expert is in the room, I can't tell who's in the room, but if I say anything wrong, that'll be up to Lori Hayes to make a correction of this. But I'm going to hold up. Coach, you know what this is?
I assume, given the context, that is a bridle, although I am no expert on these matters.
Yeah, that's the bit that is part of this bridle that I got several years ago when my kids were young. We had a cob pony. That's between a horse and a pony, his size. So this bit isn't very big, but this goes into the horse's mouth. I'm not going to demonstrate that for you, but
teeth are kind of a sore subject for me right now.
What I want to show is how smooth this bit is. This is after the horse has been trained well. Mm-hmm. And so when I grew up, because my grandfather was from the agricultural side of things, the horses that we had were trained and called plow reined. Mm-hmm. That is different than neck rein. Neck reining is you lay the reins against the neck and the horse knows how to turn one way or the other. The old terms were called gee and haw. Sometimes the old farmers would yell out gee and haw for their teams, and they would know right or left.
Which is which?
And I think gee is haw, or gee is right, and haw is left.
It's like port and starboard. Why don't they just use that from?
Right.
No.
But, why not they just use right and left? Make it easy for everybody to understand. But different people have their own languages. So once a horse is well trained, this is your standard bit. It might be bigger for a draft horse. It might, if you're going to ride a draft horse, but it might be smaller for a pony. But I'm going to show a negative regression, if you will. When I bought my property, there was things tend to turn up when you're mowing grass and cleaning pasture and stuff. And I'm going to show you this. Notice any difference between the first one and this one?
Well, it's hinged in the middle. And now what's troubling me is how did they build that?
Well, the engineer in you is worried about that. But this moves and has a central pivot point. This is called a split bit. And maybe God ordained this just because you've got a sore tooth in your mouth. Mm-hmm. But every time you've got a bendable part inside of your mouth, that's going to cause a little bit of an abrasion. So if you're pulling on one side, plow reining is where you actually pull the right rein to get the horse to go right. Neck reining is you lay the reins on the side of the horse where you want them to turn one way or the other. One's a lot more easier on the horse. Show horses are usually neck reined. Agriculture horses are usually plow reined, if that makes sense to you. But this is a step down a notch because it has this split. It's going to require the horse that's being trained to understand that it needs to go in the right direction a little bit more because it's going to give a little bit of force.
Mm-hmm. It talks a little louder, so to speak.
You're talking a little bit louder in horse language. So this one I've actually never seen before until I found it on my property.
Whoa, that looks pretty wicked.
That looks pretty wicked. There's a little bit of bendingness to it, but it's twisted wire. So everywhere there is a possible abrasion point, that's for those stubborn horses that don't want to learn. And so this is a twisted wire, and I'm hoping that these things have outlived their use years and years ago, and nobody uses these anymore. because I'm going to reach behind me and get the last one. And if you thought that one was bad, this one's going to
Okay.
probably
This is when all else fails. The bit of last resort.
or the bit of first resort when you have a really tough one. Now, here's what goes over their head, but I'm going to show you. I got to drop it back down a little bit.
Huh.
Each one of those joints moves and it looks like a
A
chainsaw
chain.
blade.
Mm-hmm.
And so every one of those points are moving, and that can create sore mouth. And that usually the stubborn horse,
Right. The more he resists it, the more painful it becomes. Yeah.
it becomes more painful. And you realize that we would have sometimes we would have a team of Belgians because my grandfather, again, loved horses and would use them every chance that he could. The Amish use tractors around here. Oddly enough, the community in our neighborhood or in our area, they don't allow air in the tires. So, and the the state roads don't allow them to put steel on the state roads because it'll chew them up. So they just basically have free flapping tread that goes onto the tires, and they quickly wear it out. But with the draft horses, you've got easily 2,000 pounds, a ton of horsepower, where you're, in my case, at my weight, at 175, 180 pounds, how am I going to hold back and train something that big? And so, based on an agricultural foundation, this country was, we basically worked with horsepower until the real early 1900s when motors came into play. And
the steam engine built the Panama Canal.
Right.
Yeah, but still a lot of to this day, I think they're still using horses in some of the canals to pull the boats.
Historically, from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington, D.C., the C&O Canal used mules to pull barges up and down the canal and had a series of locks. They haven't re-watered the canals yet here locally, but they do have one of the barges and have some great history of mules, teams of mules pulling them alongside the road next to the canal. And, I buy a car, you buy a truck or a car. The Amish, they use horses, and those mares can produce another horse later on for a replacement. When we buy a car, we don't get a replacement.
Yeah, but I don't have to feed my car when it's parked.
Right. So
I don't have to clean up after it either too much.
Hey, sometimes what we call in the area road apples, they just happen to come along, but they have their use too. But I show you all those things because, Coach, you and I talked a little bit before we went on the air, and I confessed to you that a lot of times this little appendage here coming below my nose gets me in most of the trouble in my life. And James,
I won't repeat what I said to that.
James chapter 3 tells us that animals can be, a bridle can be put on an animal and trained, and a bit be put in a horse's mouth, but nobody can tame man's mouth. Man can't do it. God can do it. And God can change that if our choice, like you said in the beginning, we have a choice to make, and God can allow us and help us to choose the right thing. If we kick against the goads or go against God, we're going to have not only abrasions physically, like you saw in some of those bits, but it's going to eat away at us. It's going to take a lot of time, and we're going to subject ourselves to a lot more pressure and trials and torment. And I think of that, it's, come to the Lord when you're young and you've really stopped a lot of trials and issues coming up in your life. Be well suited for that bit, that soft and smooth bit, rather than those harsh ones. And sometimes God has to take us, I guess we could say, out behind the woodshed and use one of these tougher pieces of equipment that we can visualize and see on us, because the tongue is full of evil. It's poisonous, James tells us, and it's a fire that's hard to put out. And I think it usually gets us into trouble if we don't keep it in check.
Well, you got me thinking a little bit, Ben, which is not uncommon. One of the comments that are thoughts I've had with regard to let's restrict the conversation to cursing. Most sin carries with it a temporal reward. Okay, stealing, for example. If you steal something, you get the benefit of whatever you stole without paying the price. Cursing, foul language, has little, if any, benefit, yet it's hard to control. I find that odd. As you were talking about the various bits, the subject, and you mentioned it toward the end, the subject of discipline comes to mind. And you said if you can encounter Christ at an earlier age, you can avoid a lot of the corrective measures that are needed later. A beautiful illustration that was shared with me once is there's a distinction between discipline and punishment. We tend to use those words interchangeably, don't we? Have you ever said, "Oh,
Yeah, and
now
that's not
there's a well-punished child"? No, you would say a well-disciplined child. By the way, a well-disciplined dog is free to roam, but one that is not well-disciplined has to be put on a leash and tied up. It is the loving discipline that gives us our freedom, Ben.
I remember the speed skater Apollo Ono, whenever he first came on the scene, and he chose to basically move to Lake Placid and live there and stay there and discipline himself, hide himself from all the distractions of the world. And he came out in those Olympics and he won a gold medal and another gold medal, and for several straight Olympics won that. Why? Because he disciplined himself, made the choice to do that. We need to be disciplined, and the tools that God gives us is the Word of God, which is sharper than any two-edged sword. It's sharper than any bit that has all these sharp edges on it, and it will do the job that it's meant to do if we choose to read it and obey it, and live by it. If we choose so. If not, we're going to have problems. We're going to have issues in our life that's going to be abrasive to God's plan if we go against Him all the time. And it's easier said than done. It's hard to live out, but I remember in a last week in Bible study that we have online with Stephanie Pavlantos, and she said something. Well, there's sometimes I just have to keep my mouth closed. And I said, can we have a Bible study next time on how you go about doing that? Because a lot of people are passionate about things, but then they take passion a little too far, and then it becomes a bit of a problem. So I think communication is the key to a peaceful life. And a lot of times poor communication causes problems. So that's what I wanted to share. It's not what's in my book about horses. You have to read what I wrote about in there about horses. But I share this with some kids, especially some kids in lieu of going to jail, they go to a campsite, and they have to build their own buildings, their bivouacs. They have to learn life the hard way in lieu of going to juvenile hall or prison. And I have a chance to share some things and show that there's some training involved whether you're a good person or bad person or whatever, you still have to train and have to learn how to use the equipment that God has given us. And that's prayer and that's Bible reading, in my opinion.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was about to tee it up for you as we're running out of time. But yes, that's a good lecture because I give a similar one. There's a price you pay for success. Most people want the success, they don't want to pay the price. But then I say, but there's a price for failure also. And I submit to you that success is a bargain.
Agreed.
It's good. Well, Ben, you've always got interesting artifacts to show us. The last time it was the bees. What's it going to be next time? Any ideas yet?
Not yet.
We got a month to think about that, though, don't we? Ben, we appreciate your ministry. It thrills me to know, that you go share all these things that God has, given you, that you have learned and sharpened your skills, and you share them so freely and so generously with the community and younger generations, folks. It's that will outlive you, Ben. And I'm proud of you, brother. I really am. And we are very fortunate. All right, well, folks, we're going to wrap it up with Ben. You know why? We got Dale Didway's on his way. Dale Didway on the way. Ben, thanks for sharing, man. Come join us in the chat room. We've got people talking about you over there. You better go police that.
Thank you.
There you have it from Ben Cooper on the first Tuesday of every month. Dale Didway coming up next in just a few moments. Looking forward to that. And I will leave you with two questions that I ask myself pretty much on a daily basis. I'd like to submit that you ask yourself the same too. The first question is this: what is the boldest thing you've ever done for Jesus Christ? Well, you don't have to answer me. Second question is, when was that? The challenge that I've accepted, I hope that you would also accept, is to never be satisfied with either answer.